This is part 1 of the read-along for Unit 3.09, Post-Impressionism 1. Post-Impressionism 1. Post-Impressionist painters took the artistic style of their predecessors in new directions. Not content with creating spontaneous paintings of light and shadow, French artists Georges Seurat and Paul Cézanne took a more analytical approach. They used color in bold ways and made their paintings look more solid than their Impressionist predecessors. So we're getting into the post-impressionist, post meaning after, so after the impressionist painters, and they took the artistic style of their predecessors, meaning the people that came before them, the impressionists, in new directions. They're not content with creating spontaneous or spur-of-the-moment paintings of light and shadow. They wanted to be more analytical, meaning they wanted to analyze their approach and be more careful about their approach to their paintings. They used color in bold ways and made their paintings look more solid than their impressionist predecessors. Be sure and download this student guide to go along with our readings. It helps you take notes. Explore post-impressionistic art. As you read through the lesson, use the student guide to take notes about each screen. You may also make quick sketches of the images to go with your notes. The post-impressionist movement. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century, a group of young painters grounded in the impressionist school set off in new and at times diverse directions. Those artists came to be grouped under the label post-impressionists. So in the last 2 decades, the last 20 years of the 19th century, the 1800s, so this is from 1880 to 1900, a group of young painters grounded in the impressionist school, meaning they learned impressionist movement and sort of grew up with impressionist artwork, set off in new and at times diverse or different directions. And those artists came to all be grouped under the label post-impressionists. This new generation retained some of the techniques of French impressionist masters Monet and Renoir, such as their vibrant color palette, distinctive brushwork, and subject matter taken from real life. But Georges Seurat, Paul Cézanne, and other post-impressionists rejected the impressionist principle of recording a scene objectively. They preferred a more personal and emotional approach. In so doing, they, in effect, spurned both realism and naturalism as well. By painting what they felt, rather than strictly what they saw, post-impressionists laid the groundwork for even more abstract artistic trends in the coming century. So they kept some of the stuff from the impressionist painters. They kept the vibrant or bright color palette. They kept the distinctive brushwork, so those short, choppy, expressionist little brush strokes, and subject matter taken from real life, but they rejected the impressionist principle of recording a scene objectively, meaning that they didn't believe that they had to record a scene objectively, meaning exactly kind of how it looks. Instead, they preferred a more personal and emotional approach. So because they decided not to show scenes exactly how it looks, they rejected that part of impressionist painting and realism and naturalism as well. These guys were painting what they felt rather than strictly what they saw. So they were sort of setting the stage for more abstract artists to come in the coming century, the 1900s. Georges Seurat. Born into a wealthy Parisian family in 1859, Georges Seurat spent 2 years at the esteemed Paris art school École des Beaux-Arts. He left school to serve a year of military service, but upon his discharge he did not resume art training, choosing instead to work independently on small drawings and paintings. So, Georges Seurat is from a rich Parisian family, meaning a family from Paris. In 1859, He was born in 1859. He spent 2 years in art school in Paris, the École des Beaux-Arts, which is the art school that you wanted to go to if you were going to be an artist back then. He left art school to go to the military for a year, but whenever he got out of the military, he didn't go straight back to art school. He decided to keep working on his own and making small drawings and small paintings. Seurat took a scientific approach to painting. He studied color theory and meticulously planned his works, making numerous preliminary sketches. Though he died at the age of 32 and left behind a relatively meager body of work, his brief career yielded some masterpieces of lasting value. So he took a scientific approach to his paintings, meaning that he studied color theory, so how colors work together, how we see colors, how colors mix, how colors look whenever they're put next to each other on a canvas. And he meticulously planned his works, meaning that he didn't just go to this park and just paint this scene and this is how everybody really looked. He planned his works, making numerous preliminary sketches. So he made a lot of preliminary sketches, meaning before he made his painting, he sketched out his ideas. So he wanted to get all his ideas on paper and plan the way everything was going to look first before he did his paintings. Though he died at the age of 32 and left behind a relatively meager body of work, meaning that he didn't leave behind very many artworks, his brief career yielded some masterpieces of lasting value. So even though he didn't have very long to work because he died really young, some of the paintings that he left behind are considered masterpieces, and we're still sitting here talking about them today. This is probably his most famous one, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte by Georges Seurat. Pointillism. Seurat wanted to do more than merely record the colors that he observed in nature as Claude Monet had done. He used dabs of color in a disciplined, orderly fashion to create the illusion of solid forms on canvas. So he didn't want to just say, okay, I went out and I observed a scene, and this is the colors that everything really was whenever I was sitting there looking at it with my eye. And so he used little dabs of color in a disciplined, orderly fashion, meaning he wasn't just quickly putting down little dabs of color. He was very methodical. He planned it out. He thought about where every little dab of color was going to go to create the illusion of solid forms on canvas. To learn how the eye perceives color, Seurat immersed himself in the scientific study of optics and color theory. He learned that if he placed tiny dots of pure color next to each other on the canvas, the eye would mix the colors together when the painting was viewed from a distance. Blue and yellow dots next to each other, for example, visually merged to form green. So he figured out what we call optical color mixing. So he didn't just put green on the canvas like the impressionist painters before him would. He put little dabs of blue and yellow next to each other, and whenever you look really, really close to the painting, you can see the little dots of blue and yellow, but when you're backed up and looking at the painting from a distance, they kind of, your brain sort of mix those blue and yellow dots together and makes it look green. The effect was a dazzling, pulsating image that Seurat preferred to dull, muddied colors mixed on a palette. The technique became known as Pointillism, or in the term Seurat preferred, divisionism. His painting process was meticulous and painstakingly slow. First, he had to decide which colors to place next to each other, and then he had to determine the correct proportion of each color. So you can see a close-up of one of his paintings. The effect was dazzling and pulsating, meaning it looks almost sort of like it's buzzing, right? And he preferred that to the dull, muddied colors that you mix up on a palette and put straight onto the canvas. He liked this kind of bright effect. The technique became known as Pointillism, but he called it divisionism. So if you think about it like dividing the colors, instead of painting with green, he paints with blue and yellow. He divides the colors up. We call it pointillism, which you can remember if you think of it as little points of color. His process was meticulous and painstakingly slow, so he was very careful about it, and it took a long time. He had to decide what colors to place next to each other, and then he had to determine the correct proportion of each color. So how much blue and how much yellow do you have to put next to each other before they look green whenever you look at it from a distance? Composition, light, and color. In a clear departure from the carefree work of the Impressionists, Seurat meticulously arranged this composition. He reduced many figures and objects to simple geometric shapes that fit together almost like puzzle pieces. He created volume and the illusion of space by placing dabs of pure color in just the right proportions to create dark and light values. The deep greens and shadowy figures in the foreground lead the eye to the brilliantly lit expanse of park that appears to recede in the distance. While the brushstrokes and composition move away from Impressionism, the painting does have elements of Impressionism. What are some of them? So, in a clear departure from the carefree work of the Impressionists, meaning he's moving away from the quick and kind of sketchy Impressionist paintings where they were just trying to capture a quick, fleeting moment of how the light looks on a scene. He's moving away from that, and he is meticulously arranging this composition. Means every little piece of this painting was planned. He reduced many figures and objects to simple geometric shapes that fit together almost like puzzle pieces. So, very simple shapes on here that whenever you put them all together, they make up this picture of these people in this park. He created volume and the illusion of space by placing dabs of pure color in just the right proportions to create dark and light values. So it looks like there's really a lot of space in this painting because in the foreground you have these figures sitting in the shade of a tree, and then in the background you can see the rest of the park is brightly lit, and you can see all the objects getting smaller as they go back, which gives you this feeling that this painting goes back a long way. It's not flat. While the brush strokes and composition move away from Impressionism, the painting does have some elements of Impressionism. What are some of them? So what do you see in this painting that reminds you of an Impressionist painting? And the answer is that Seurat uses an Impressionist theme. So the theme of the painting is leisure activities. These are not people at work. These are people out enjoying themselves at the park. He also uses the Impressionist palette of brilliant colors and captures the effect of light on objects. So it's bright colors. It's not muddy colors that have been mixed up on a palette and then put down. And he also really pays attention to the way light is hitting the people and the objects in this painting.